I thought I heard somebody say the Jaguars were moving to London. Newsflash. Ain't happening. I'll tell you all about that and a little bit more here on Locked On Jaguars.
You are Locked On Jaguars, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
That lady ain't told one lie. It is your team every day. This is Locked On Jaguars, and we thank you for making us your first listen every single day. You can find us over on the YouTube page. Also, the YouTube page is called Locked On Jaguars. Make sure you tap in every single day. Hit that like button, please. I'm going to say it again. Hit that like button. Get 2,000 views, and then I get 100 people like it. Hit the like button. Make sure you subscribe. Also, hit the bell so you receive notifications each and every time you see an episode or hear of an episode. It'll be here on Locked On Jaguars. Make sure you tap in every single day where you get your audio podcast, and we will be here for you. Today's show is sponsored by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Shout out to the everydayers for joining us every single day here on Locked On Jaguars. And you can be an everyday. All you got to do is join us every single day. When we finish the show, we'll talk about an interaction I had with someone else who covered the team, another creator, Jordan DeLugo. We had an interesting back and forth about Brandon Aiyuk. And I'll tell you why I don't think at this point it makes a lot of sense, even though I'm all for player procurement and upgrading talent. It don't make sense for me at this point. The Jags are moving on up like the Jeffersons in some new digs, not moving the way everyone has said they are moving to another city. Now we're going to start with this. We ain't going to bury the lead. New stadium, who this? That's right. That is a flex. It is a flex because for so many years, so many people, and I'll preface this by saying I am all, and I'm being biased here, but I am all about supporting local, right? Local media, listening to local people that cover the team, that have their finger on the pulse of the team every single day, as opposed to listening to national people who I have respect for, but respectfully, they don't have their finger on the pulse of the team the way local media does. And the reason why I can say that is because even though I cover the NFL, I don't have my finger on 31 other teams the way I have them on the Jacksonville Jaguars. So I go about the business of doing research and asking a lot of questions. And leaving things open-ended to get to the better part of understanding, as opposed to making statements. Like, I'm going to give you one of the statements that people have made. They're moving to London. No, they're not. They don't even know why the Jaguars were doing those games in London, not in depth. They were doing them because at the time, it was 11% of their total revenue that they were getting. And then they say, well, that means it's not sustainable in Jacksonville. It had nothing to do with people buying tickets. It had a lot to do with Fortune 500 companies being in Jacksonville and having those types of dollars and sponsorships that were lacking. The move to London, whether it worked or not, was to create more business, international business in Jacksonville. That is an ongoing process. That is not something that's going to happen within 4 or 5 years. This new stadium deal for the Jaguars, it's 30 years. And at the end of the day, it's like dropping a hammer down saying they're not going anywhere. Stop talking about them moving. Shaq Connor said it for years. And I know people don't want to believe billionaires sometimes, but in this case, it was true. They aren't going. And one of the other arguments was, well, if they don't go overseas, they'll go somewhere because they've been terrible and the team doesn't, the people, the league doesn't want a team in Jacksonville. Those fans don't deserve it. That was another lie. And I'm going to call it out for what it is. Everyone wants to talk about tarps and doesn't understand that stadium was initially constructed they had to make sure that they kept a large capacity of 80,000, around 80,000 for a Florida-Georgia game that is very much a part of our community here in Jacksonville. That stadium was one of the largest stadiums in the National Football League with one of the smaller markets. So therefore, the tarps was, you can't tear down part of a stadium. So the tarps were to make the stadium a 62 to 68,000 seat stadium where it would be more full. Even with those tarps, the Jaguars at some point were getting more fans than a lot of your favorite teams in these big cities. So it was a myth. The other myth was this. that somehow the team that spent the most money in free agency during Shad Khan's tenure, that somehow the team that probably had more top 10 picks in the draft during Shad Khan's tenure than any other team, that somehow the product that they had on the field would just miraculously be better if they moved to some unknown metropolis like San Antonio, which they'd never be able to do because it'd get blocked. Like St. Louis, that have had two teams over the course of my life in the last 35, 40 years, and they lost them both. Like Oakland, that's losing all of their pro franchises because of finances in that city. So my thing is, they kept saying that they're leaving, and then when you told them about London, and then they realized that that's not it, folks kept coming up with all of these scenarios where they just throwing stuff out there. And I've been telling people, we need to normalize not just throwing stuff out there, because I got a window right here and I look out there and there's a whole bunch of stuff that's just flying around that people threw out there that it does not make any sense. So therefore, you get all of these things and you get all of these people popping off about the team moving, but they can't tell you where the hell is the team going. I guess they were going to Gotham City somewhere. I don't know where they were saying this team was moving. Maybe they were moving to Ludowici, Georgia, or Tupelo, Mississippi. I have no idea. This metropolis that was sitting there waiting to give the Jacksonville Jaguars a bunch of money and a brand new stadium in the United States to come in, and I don't know. And if I did know, I do know this, that the product on the field that they were doing, the free agents that they signed and the people that they were drafting that weren't working out, and the poor team building, that probably had nothing to do with being in 80-degree weather for the most part all year round. That had nothing to do with being 10 miles from the Atlantic Ocean, where I-10 ends and the Atlantic Ocean begins. It probably had nothing to do with all of these golf courses and the great living that we have around here. I guess all of that stuff that people were breathing in was the reason why the team was bad, and not the fact that they were just making bad decisions, as if that's going to stop if you move this team somewhere else. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. So now we can woosah and we don't have to worry about all that, because you know why? Because they're not going anywhere. And today you hear silence. This, you know why? Because all of those talking heads, and Jason Lockenfor is one of them, and he ain't the only one. I ain't going to beat him back. I'm only going to come on him because you go on social media and they're wearing him out right now because he was so definitively saying that the Jaguars are going to move. But there's a bunch of them. There's a bunch of them on ESPN. There's a bunch of them on Fox Sports. There are too many to remember. There are other guys and other people that write for a living that did and said the same things. So my response is, new stadium, who this? Where are you now? Where are you now with all of the narratives? It's like I don't hear anything. People say crickets. I don't even hear crickets now. The crickets are quiet because those people this entire time were absolutely misinformed. They were misinformed about what was going on, the reasons why it was going on, the likelihood that something else was going to go on. To be honest, they had no idea what they were talking about. That's why they're not talking now, because they had no idea what they were talking about then, and what happened really shows that they don't have any idea what they're talking about. So maybe they're doing the best job they can of sitting this one out. You probably should have sat it out when you were saying that stuff before about this team. But as we know, that's not what people do. So I'll tell you what we're going to do. I'm going to tell you all about this deal the best that I can. I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm a member of city council, but I ain't going to dive too much into all of that. But I am going to tell you what it actually means. And I'll talk to and about some people that were opposed to it. I'll do all of that here in segment number 2, when I describe the Jaguars as the Jeffersons, because they're moving on up into some new digs here pretty soon. I'll give you the plan of how the Jaguars are going to play, where they're going to play, and how this whole thing is going to go. Hopefully, we'll do all of that in just a second here in segment number 2 on Locked On Jaguar. Today's show is brought to you and sponsored by eBay Motors, man. And this is all about passion, all about drive, and all about patience. It sounds like football, but that's also the formula for winning championships in other areas, and it's what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle, level it up to peak performance, superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit. Only available to U.S. customers. Segment number 2 here on Locked On Jaguars, where it's your team every day. We thank you for making us your first listen. All right, we're moving on up. If you remember the song with the Jeffersons, it says we're moving on up, ironically, to the east side. That's the part of the city where the stadium is currently located and will currently be relocated when the Jacksonville Jaguars start construction. The Jaguars, this is the plan, to play 2024 in the stadium, to play 2025 in the stadium. 2026, they'll play in the stadium, but the max capacity will be like 43,000 seats because some of the stadium will not be accessible. 2027, they have to go to another site. I don't know if that's been determined or not. I know they're talking about either Gainesville or Orlando. We'll see definitively as we get closer what they decide to do with that. In 2028, that's when you get the keys and the doors open to the new building. So it'll be under construction. There will be some things going on this year and next year, but those are probably engineering things that you won't really see, and that won't affect the crowd and the way people are gathered at the stadium. You know, a lot of plans, programs, and a lot of infrastructural engineering and things like that. And the same thing for 2025. I do think in 2026, it'll look a little bit different. It'll feel uncomfortable. The games probably won't, seem as loud. There won't be as many tickets spread around. Probably have to go through a little bit of a maze and do some physical gymnastics when you go down to the area. But a safety will always be paramount. And I'm sure, even though it'll look funny and feel funny, it'll still be good to have the team in the city. And I think the sports bars are going to benefit from that, because I think people are going to have day parties for these games, especially with those extra 20,000 people not being able to actually attend the game. So 2027, when they move on, I suspect that wherever they go, there will be buses and caravans and all kinds of stuff taking people to and from games. But the main part of it is, and even the road games, I think the road games will have a significant amount of people going to those road games too, because folks that decide that they don't want to do the commute every Saturday or Sunday to the nearby temporary location will probably just take all of their funds and sometimes just go, you know what we're going to do, man? We're just going to wait. Once every 4 weeks, we'll go to another destination. I think that kind of makes things fun. But then in 2028, when they finally come back home, they'll have a new, beautiful stadium. I've seen the rendition of it. I like it. It still feels futuristic and surreal. But I know, along with a lot of other things that are going on around the sports complex that they're going to be doing, it's going to be a thing of beauty, right? So we're looking at 4 years from now. But that's the process. That's how it's going to go. They will have some shade covering up fans, creating a situation where people aren't as hot as they normally are. Because and I've had the benefit of sitting in the press box, but even I'm telling you, anybody that sits on that front row in the press box, they'll tell you, while it is not nearly as hot as it is outside, you can imagine, because you sit there and you're like, damn, it's a little bit toasty right here. Sitting on that front row by the glass, it's a little bit, it ain't uncomfortable, but I can only imagine how those people feel. And you can see them. Matter of fact, every now and then I see people I know, I kind of stand up and wave to them or whatever, or somebody hits me up on social media and say, hey, I see where you're sitting. And I'll wave to them and talk to them. And the thing is with that, you see the suffering, man. One time they ran out of water. If you ain't familiar with Jacksonville, it was so hot they ran out of water, man. And it was crazy. It was like 100 degrees that day, and ain't no telling how it felt in that stadium. So what should be an advantage for Jacksonville will probably still be a little bit of an advantage, although around that time of year it's hot everywhere. right? But the Jaguars will make this a little bit more fan friendly and give us a stadium for the future that will allow them to do a lot of things. I don't even talk about a Super Bowl, but the stadium will allow the city to host a lot of events, and there will be more hotels back then. There's talk maybe they'll try to make a bid for the NFL draft because that entire area would be a huge entertainment complex. And I think when you get the draft and you start getting maybe a playoff game in college or some of the other postseason games, they already have the I guess it's still called the Gator Bowl, but they will have maybe some kickoff classics. And they'll start to show with the new improvements that they are a city that is really, really equipped to handle even more. And that's going to maybe lead into talk about a Super Bowl down the road, especially if this team continues to improve and they become one of those contenders that is really in the national consciousness of everyone, and folks start putting more eyes towards. So it's a super, super win-win situation, in my opinion. And while we are taking a day to do the They Not Like Us dance on everybody and have a block party on all of those people that we considered haters. And let me tell you something, having a difference of opinion about something, and this is going to lead to the next segment, having a difference of opinion about something doesn't make you a hater. You're only a hater when you have malice and you're ill-informed or misinformed. And when people try to tell you, folks that are local try to tell you, look, I see where you're going with the thinking. I understand why you think that, but let me tell you why you're factually off and incorrect, and why you're never going to get anywhere saying certain things, because if you include certain things that are absolutely false and people that are here, they know it, they're not going to pay attention to the other things that you say. So that's the difference of opinion that we've had about this. It's not that the Jaguars have traditionally been a poor franchise. It's on and off the field. It's not the fact that the Jaguars haven't given out a product traditionally over the last couple of decades that made anybody who's not a Jaguar fan or a Jacksonville native really want to care about the team. All of that stuff is true. I only got on folks blaming the city and the people, the fans, for that, as opposed to directing their ire towards the people who were making all of the decisions and coincidentally making all the money while they made those decisions. That, to me, has been the thing. It's like the fans have been complaining about the same thing, but then an outsider comes in and tells the fans that have been complaining about certain things that you're the reason why those things exist. And it's like, well, how am I the victim and the perpetrator in this situation? And those are the people that I've always defended, and not so much as just people that go to the games. The city. When people talk about the city not being a good city and a kind of city that can support something, no, I think this city will support, if anything, over the last 25, 30 years, what this city has shown you is they will support a team that doesn't win. I mean, it's right there in plain sight for people to see, and it has been monumentally ignored by the fact that instead of looking at Jaguar fans in the city of Jacksonville as, man, y'all are superheroes. How do y'all cheer every week and Duval and have Jaguars Twitter be what it is? How is that? And they've done this. What have they done for you? Instead of that, all you get is, y'all ain't no good. That's why the team sucks. And see, that's that lazy stuff that drove me crazy and continues to drive me crazy. But it ain't driving me crazy today because, as I said, if you listen right now, I don't hear anything. And the reason why I don't hear anything is because they were wrong and they know it, and they're hiding and they're running and they're not saying a word because they got egg on their face, and they're sitting around thinking of an excuse right now or something clever to come up with that'll deflect from the fact that they sat around here and played in y'all's face and told y'all all of that stuff and picked on low-hanging fruit because it was easy to do and it was easily believable, but it was never true the entire time. Hey, psst, I see dead people. Yeah, with dead opinions and narratives that won't say a word today. Locked On has come up with, I'm glad I'm going to segue to this. If you're watching Fox Sports or ESPN and you don't hear those people talking about the Jaguars today, you know why? You know why? Maybe you should have turned down the volume a long time ago and make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels. That part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day where it is local. I had a discussion talking about stuff where you have a different opinion. I had a discussion with Jordan DeLugo on social media that I want to share with you. I want to just express my opinions on it because it wasn't a gotcha moment. It wasn't one of those things where I was trying to be a menace to anybody that, that covers the team. But it's trade chatter about Brandon Aiyuk and why I don't think there should be any interest at this point in him, even though he's a good player. I'll tell you all about that stuff in just a second here on segment number 3 of Locked On Jaguars. All right, segment number 3 here on Locked On Jaguars, where it's your team every day. We thank you for making us your first listen. A lot of chatter online about Brandon Aiyuk. So this is something that we talked about back when free agency first started, and there were 2 wide receivers, or there were 3 or 4 wide receivers that a lot of people were talking about. Realistically, it was Brandon Aiyuk, who probably wanted to be traded, and maybe the 49ers had put little feelers out there. And I contacted Brian Peacock and Eric Crocker today, and apparently they well, at least Peacock told me that the 49ers wanted a first-round pick, and nobody would really meet that standard because you got to give up a first-round pick right before the draft, where you're going to get a player, a good proven player, but you're not going to get a young player, and you'd also have to pay him in a market where it's going to be at least $100 million, right? So there's the talk of whether or not you do that alone. So nobody did that then. And maybe, the thinking was, well, maybe they offered a first-round pick for 2024, and the 49ers said, no, we need the compensation now. So there was that thought. And maybe the thought was you could get him with a future first-round pick, and if not before the draft, then maybe after the draft. Well, the 49ers then would be playing themselves because they could have got that before the draft. Instead of getting it after the draft, they could have gotten it before the draft. So the other thing is, it was Brandon Aiyuk, it was T. Higgins, who you really probably could have got if you wanted him because he had a franchise tag, and you probably could have structured any offer you wanted to structure in a way that the Bengals wouldn't have been able to match it, because the Bengals have been pretty competitive lately, and maybe they wouldn't have matched that deal. So if the Jaguars wanted to go there was also talk about Justin Jefferson, who was never leaving. And there was also some talk about CeeDee Lamb, who ain't going nowhere. So you can kill that, right? So what the Jaguars did, in my opinion, was they probably looked at it and then decided, you know what? Nah, this is the route we're going to go. We're going to get Gabe Davis. We're going to revamp our entire room. We're going to get Duvernay from Baltimore, Devin Duvernay, right? So that's 2 guys. They still at the time had Zay Jones, and they obviously had missed out on Calvin Ridley, re-signing their own guy in Calvin Ridley. So they had 3 receivers, right? In a deep wide receiver group. So they were either going to go wide receiver or corner in the first round, according to a lot of people, and it turned out that's what it was. And then maybe whatever way they didn't go in the first, they would still, if they went corner in the first, they would still be able to. I still think they would have gone Mason Smith in the second round like they did, and then they would come back and double back with the wide receiver in the third round, which there was a bunch of people still on the board. At some point, we have to realize what the Jaguars did when they gave Davis $39 million over 3 years with, I think, between a $10 and $11 million signing bonus, and then got Devin Duvernay. Is what they did was, and remember, they already had Christian Kirk. He's their guy. He's one of the super leaders on this team. They had 4 guys, and then you include Parker Washington in the improvement that he's had and that he was obviously having before we all had a chance to see it. They were pretty good at wide receiver, right? We thought, okay, maybe that's not quite enough. Maybe they need to add another player. But the bottom line is they had their people. At that point, to me, the Jaguars chose quantity over just having that one dude. Maybe nobody was as good as T. Higgins, and maybe nobody was as good as Aiyuk, but they wouldn't have to break the bank and pay any of them, even though they would have done it for Calvin Ridley. But the difference is they wouldn't have had to give up the compensation. They wouldn't have had to give up the compensation. Keeping Calvin Ridley was free. They didn't have to do anything. They chose to take a chance that nobody was going to sign him before they had a chance. They made what they believe was a real competitive offer, but he chose to go to Tennessee. That's fine. No problem. But I do think at that point, with the Jaguars identifying Brian Thomas Jr., and I asked Trent Baalke straight up, he was your guy. If you move back, was he still your guy? He said he was the guy the whole time. So Brian Thomas Jr. was a target. I think a team that adds 3 wide receivers and makes the choice to go 3 for 1 without giving up compensation, I think it'd be real crazy for them at this point to double back and undo that. Now, it won't be a direct undoing, because I talked to Jordan DeLugo this morning, and I was trying to get him to clarify for me exactly what would you give up, because we can all sit here and say, man, they ought to go after the Fredrickson kid, the pass rusher. Okay, but what do you give up? And does it make sense to pay another guy all of that money when $14, $15 million to be your third rusher? Or you're trying to bench the dude who was a number 1 pick just 3 years ago or 2.5 years ago, and he just had a career year with 10.5 sacks, and you're going to thwart that? What do you do? So my point has always been, I mean, what are we going to do? Are you going to keep Gabe Davis and make him your third receiver, making $13 million a year? You think the 49ers are going to take Christian Kirk? If you offered them a 1 and a 3 and they took it now when they wouldn't have took that then, because the picks are going to come next year, all of a sudden you think Christian Kirk, they're going to take him and his $18 million deal or whatever it is for 1 year? You think they're going to, you think that? I would tell, if I was San Francisco, I'd tell them to leave Kirk out. Don't be throwing me extra money I got to pay nobody. Even if it's just for 1 year. It's not like the NBA where you get rewarded for having an expiring contract. That's not the way this works. It's not the way it works. They don't have to take Christian Kirk's salary on, hoping it falls off the cap next year. They can not take it this year. They drafted a wide receiver in the first round. They also have Deebo Samuel. Why would they take an $18 million or whatever his salary is option this year? You can't trade Gabe Davis, can you? And then Jordan said that he wasn't going to trade Gabe Davis. So that means it had to be Christian Kirk and Tim Jones. I mean, that ain't moving the needle for the 49ers, I don't think. There's no way you're going to get a number 1. And I am not opposed to upgrading any position. I just think there's a practicality to it that you have to just pay attention to how you allocate stuff. And I was all for if they wanted to do that 4 or 5 months ago. But once they've done what they've already done, you can't do it. You ain't trading Gabe Davis. The 49ers want Gabe Davis, they would have signed him. And then how can you trade him when you gave him a bonus already? You already gave him $10 million. He hadn't caught 1 ball for you. So that's another $10 million you just threw away. Now you're trading him. You get Aiyuk. Yeah, but guess what you got to do? You got to pay him a whole bunch of money. And even though the first year salary will probably help you this year because of the way you structure it, it ain't going nowhere. It's coming next year. Next year, you got a whole bunch of other things you got to do. You got to pay DBs. You might have to find you another offensive lineman if you don't develop guys. You got to think about ETN. And then after that, you're going to start thinking about Trayvon. I mean, at some point, you have to be responsible. And at some point, you have to know that a team, what they have done is, and whether they're wrong or not, whether it works or not, they have proactively decided this is the way we're going to go. And now 4 months later to undo it and do something that you could have done 4 months ago after you've already done this other stuff makes absolutely no sense to me. And I know, I don't think Jordan was saying that this is what they're going to do, or this is what he says it's something just to look at. Me, I don't think you even look at, what are you worried about it for? If somebody dangled Jamar Chase out there, now I would disrupt a whole bunch of stuff because he is a clear top 5 wide receiver and a game changer. I think Aiyuk's a good player. I think if he's the game changer that people are making him out to be in this trade, the 49ers wouldn't let him go. They'd find other people to cut. They'd find other people to move. That's just my opinion. I just think when you go shopping for these folks, just understand you can remodel all you want to, but when you remodel means moving the old out and coming in with the new. Doesn't mean moving the junk out and keeping the kind of good stuff. No, if I got a whole living room, okay, technically I got 2, but if I go buy a big sectional, I only have room for 1 big sectional, and I already got one, and it's less than a year old. So if I go buy another one, I got to get rid of this one. What if the 49ers don't want it? What do you do? At some point, this can't be about whether or not you think Trent Baalke is good at drafting. It has to be about what a team should be doing fiscally. And don't hit me with the, oh, sure, you don't believe in getting good players? Yeah, I believe in getting good players. And if I had my choice, I'd go right up there and I'd get that defensive end out of Cleveland. Or I'd go to Pittsburgh and get their edge rusher too and just figure it out. And if I could, I'd bring Jalen Ramsey back. Well, maybe not that because I don't feel like hearing people argue, but you get my point. Sauce Gardner. I get Jamar Chase and Jordan Jefferson. Justin Jefferson. Jordan Jefferson's already on the team. But I'm just saying, yeah, we want to play that game. I can do that. Why don't we just sign Chris Jones? He was a free agent. Just sign Chris Jones. Because it doesn't work like that. Now, if the Jaguars do this, I'm going to come back on here. I'm going to lambaste them for doing it, even though I'll say, hey, they got a good player, but at what cost? And why did they do it now as opposed to doing it months ago? All right, man, make sure you check out Locked On Sports today. I'm glad I had a chance to clear that up. Shout out to everyone, Jordan, and everyone else who's creating content that people like for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's available on the Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. You guys take care of each other, man. We'll have more talk for you. Congratulations to the city of Jacksonville for getting it done. Mayor Deegan, the city council, Mark Lamping, and everyone else involved. Now we can put it to bed. The Jacksonville Jaguars will be here for another 30 years. And I'll be here hopefully for another 30 years, but I'll be at least for the rest of this week. Y'all check me out here on Locked On Jaguars. Thank you for listening.